Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you everybody for joining me as we dive into another episode of the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair all of those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So today we're going to be going over some more of the Bestiary. Specifically, we're going to be talking about spirits today. And we look at all this stuff in an effort to kind of gear up for Avowed, so that way we can have a better appreciation for the narratives that are going on in that game and just understand a little bit more about what's going on. And seeing spirits or, those kind of enemies like ghosts and whatnot are very likely. I mean, I don't see us playing a game of Avowed without seeing something like that going on, considering they are, well, I don't know about commonplace, but you see them a lot in fantasy, and you do see them a lot in Pillars of Eternity. So that's what we're going to be going over today, is creatures that fall into the category of spirits. There's no news to go over. I am recording this the day before the Game Awards, so who knows, there might be news after this episode releases, but as of this moment, there's not really anything to go over. So thanks everyone for joining me today and your patience on this a little more of a hectic schedule as of late. It's been fun getting back into it, and it's giving me a sense of normalcy again. So I hope you've been enjoying as well, but with that all said, let's dive right into the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Most of the lore we're going to get today come from the Pillars of Eternity 1 guidebook, which is the collector's edition. It's got the lore for the entire world of Eora, or at least the stuff that you need to know. And usually you can find it in your PC files if you have the Hero edition of Pillars of Eternity 1. You could also theoretically buy it on Amazon. I don't know if there's any more copies left. The last one I looked at was used, and it was pretty expensive. But anyways, you can also find a lot of this information online. I will be using the Pillars of Eternity fandom webpage to get some of this stuff to supplement with. But before we begin talking about some creatures that we see within the world of Eora that are classified as the spirit kind, let's talk about what it is that the spirits classification is. To put that in a broader context, whenever you run into a creature within any fantasy world, it'll usually fall into some subcategory within a larger bestiary. So within the world of Eora, there are things like beasts, which are mundane creatures like large beetles, or wolves, or even dragons. In my previous episode, we talked about the primordial category, which is where we talk about creatures that are not beasts, they're not mundane, but they're not vessels that are, like the undead and things like that. And they're certainly not ghosts. They have a very low level of intelligence, like that of a plant. And we discussed a little bit more about what primordials are there. Spirits is one of such categories of creature that you can encounter within the world of Eora. In the Pillars of Eternity guidebook, page 102, we see this one paragraph for what spirits are classified as. Modern understanding of the spiritual realm is largely thanks to those denizens who, for a multitude of reasons, remain tethered to the mortal half of existence. Unfortunately, their association with the living is often a source of terror. Many of the incorporeal dead are as numb and unreasoning as forces of nature, while others greedily covet the souls of the living. The spiritual essences across Eora are ever-present reminders that death is a fragile balance with no guarantee of comfort or closure. I find that last part particularly interesting, right? The idea that if dying is not necessarily a guarantee of comfort or closure in this world, because the world of Eora runs on a cycle of reincarnation known as the Wheel. So people die in the world of Eora, their soul leaves their body, it goes to the beyond, and then it comes back and enters into a new body. Cycle of reincarnation. Pretty basic stuff. And that's what this world revolves around. And so the idea that spirits, or souls in some form or the other, can still continue to exist. It doesn't follow the proper cycle, it doesn't follow the wheel properly. There's something gone awry or askew, and that's where we see these particular creatures coming in. It's a reminder that there's no guarantee that if you die, your soul will actually do what it's supposed to do. So a little bit terrifying, actually, when you start to think of the implications of that. But so this is what we're talking about with spirits. It has to do with the souls of people, or at least the stuff that souls are made of, which is called essence, and how when you bring essence together in different formats or different situations, that it results in a unique kind of creature. And it's an incorporeal kind. Yet it is still there. It's concrete in the sense it still exists. But it's incorporeal in that it doesn't really have an actual body. Hence the name spirit. In general, we're going to be talking about 4 main categories of creature, although there are different variants within them. We have blights, Ciangula. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It's Cean space Gwla, and the W has a little hat over it. And if I remember how to read Glanfathan, it should be Ciangula, but I always read it as Ciangula whenever I played the game, and that's pretty sure that's not what it is. So we have blights, Ciangula, shadows, and Will-o-Wisps. So these are the 4 main spirits that we encounter within Pillars of Eternity, although theoretically speaking, there could be other kinds of creatures out there. These are just the ones that they created for the game. So as we go through today, I want you guys to think about what other kind of variations of a spiritual creature could we run into in the World of Eora? How does it come about? And might we see it in Avowed? I'm definitely interested in getting your guys' feedback on that. So first, talking about blights. Blights are amorphous clouds that rapidly swirl with violent energy. Within the maelstrom, dozens of humanoid shapes materialize and vanish within an instant. Faces scream in silent agony while hands desperately clutch and claw at the air around the mass. For a little bit of context, when looking at a blight, it's essentially, it looks like what it sounds like. It just looks like, if you could just picture a ball of energy in your head, and if you attach a particular elemental type to it, you're pretty much thinking of what a blight looks like. So if I said, picture a ball of energy, but it's ice, you're probably thinking something a little blue with, cold around it. Like I said, picture a ball of energy, but it's fire and explosions, so you'd probably picture just this energy and it's crackling at the seams and there's fire around it and it's hot. It's kind of like that, right? Without trying to get into too much detail about how to visually look at it, that's essentially what we're looking at with blights. Now, how they come about is very interesting. There are these things within the World of Eora called beverages, is a spirit wind. And essentially what it is it's not a physical wind, but a wind of the spirit, and it's strong enough to rend the soul from the very body of a normal creature. And so if a beverages, that is a spirit wind, comes by, they can create blights. So beverages often create blights. If souls are ripped free from bodies and caught in the center of the storm, that is the beverages, they may become stuck together and bonded with any other elemental substances within the maelstrom. They are pure chaos and confusion, and destroying them is a mercy to the souls trapped within. So it sounds to me like when a beverages comes through or anything like that, it rips the souls out of creatures, whether it be humans or animals or elves or what have you, and it kind of like, in a maelstrom, puts all of this essence, that is the stuff that souls are made of, together, and it like fuses it all into one piece, which is why it sounds like they're in a pretty horrific and chaotic state of being. And it's that amalgamation of just this chaotic mess of different souls that make the blights what they are, which probably explains as well why they're so violent, because they're just clawing to get out, and in the happenstance they just also hurt things around them as well. Experimenting with blight creations is yet another questionable activity that has earned animancers a bad reputation in many circles. For those not in the know, animancers are a unique type of scientist within the world that study essence, that is the stuff that souls are made of. Some see it as dangerous and inhumane, others see it as means to an end. Some also fear that unethical animancers create blights, never mind how difficult this would be. So there is, I guess, a field within the science of animancy about creating blights, which you could definitely say would be unethical, considering what a blight is by definition of the word. It's just this forced amalgamation of different soul essence smashed together, and it's just violent, chaotic, and confusing. Yeah, I could see that definitely being unethical. Why an animancer would want to create a blight, like obviously to study it, but to what end? Skipping over to the Pillars of Eternity fandom, we actually see some interesting notes here. I'm not sure where the source is for it, but these are the notes. On one hand, attempts at vivisection have led to promising strides in treating patients who, for one reason or another, contain within their bodies 2 or more complete souls fused together, which has been identified as the root cause of a variety of mental and physiological disorders. So, you have one idea here for studying a blight, is that if you could figure out a way to unfuse the souls that are trapped within a blight, then you could theoretically do that with people who have fused souls within their body, thus leading to less issues from that. So there are some practical, in the game world anyways, there are some practical benefits to this. The variants of blights that we have are earth, flame, rain, and wind blights, either small, regular, or greater sized. There is also the magma blight. Next we have the Kian Gula. Like phantoms, these are violent and confused spirits that have not moved on. Specifically, these are the spirits of women who die under particularly tragic or traumatic circumstances, hence the name Kian Gula, which translates to blood mother. The popular image of the Kian Gula as the spirit of a jilted lover has changed in recent years as the effects of Widewind's legacy has become better known. Now, with so many Hollowborn and a steep rise in Kian Gula sightings, many tie these spirits to mothers who have died in childbirth, particularly in giving birth to Hollowborn. These spirits can also come from the insane women who perished in a violent crime or accident, or women who led a particularly violent life. So that is a Kian Gula. They are like phantoms, and we're going to have to read about phantoms in a second to understand what that is. But it's interesting that it is specifically spirits of women who die under tragic circumstances. I don't think that there is a particular type of phantom that exists as a result of a man dying under traumatic circumstances, although we're about to read the lore on phantoms, so maybe I'm incorrect on that. But I wonder what the associative lore of that would be. Like, what would a Kian Gula look like if it was a masculine version, for example? I like the distinction here because it shows that the creatures that are called spirits anyways, the thing that determines them can be an assortment of things. So in this particular instance, it's the gender of the person itself, or the spirit that is, and the circumstance in which the person was killed. In this instance, phantoms and Kian Gulas, what happens with them is that they are spirits that have not moved on. So as I mentioned before, this is a cycle of reincarnation this world operates on, but there are circumstances in which a spirit doesn't move on. It doesn't go to the beyond. It doesn't go to the afterlife, if you will, and it stays in the mundane physical world. And that has all sorts of negative effects, including the creation of a Kian Gula, who has, we'll say it's not a friendly ghost. It's not the Casper, your friendly ghost. It's something, it's got like a banshee. It will scream at you, which will cause all sorts of problems. I don't know if that's like a feminine trope right there that they're trying to go with, that it's got the banshee scream. But hey, it works for a fantasy creature, that's for sure. They're terrifying to behold. So yeah, that's some interesting things there. Looking just further down at the phantom, so we have a better understanding of what a Kian Gula is. Phantoms are souls that did not properly separate from the body after death. This usually happens as a result of severe trauma, particularly in the case of a violent death. Unlike lost souls, which are incapable of interacting with or being detected by normal mortals, phantoms, like shadows and Kian Gula, maintain a connection to the physical world. They will attack other life forms without discrimination. Phantoms can also come from people who lived particularly chaotic lives, including violent criminals and the insane. Anyone can become a phantom under the right circumstances. The fear of phantoms and their association with the mentally ill result in shunning across many communities. I don't know why I said it like that. Anyone could become a phantom under the right circumstances. Like I'm hopeful, like I hope you become a phantom. So yeah, so there's a lot of actually very interesting lore here. First off, that phantoms and other spirit creatures are the result of souls not properly separating from the body. So there is a process. There's like a mechanical process, if you will, behind what causes a soul to detach from the body. There's something about physical death that lets the soul leave the body and then move on to the beyond. But if they don't leave the body properly, they can become these spirits walking across the physical world. Phantoms, though, are different from just a regular spirit, regular in quotes. They are particularly the result of severe trauma or a very severely mentally ill or someone who died in a violent way, and that's how these phantoms are created. So the more severe and negative the experience, the more likely you are to become a phantom. So that's a description of a Kian Gula and phantom. That's the lore associated behind that. Now, we mentioned shadows when talking about this, when they were talking about a soul wandering around that weren't detectable by normal mortals, but that phantoms are, like the Kian Gula and shadows. And the shadows are another type of spirit-based creature. Shadows are created when creatures with heavily fractured souls die without re-entering the cycle of rebirth. Because these souls are damaged, they drain essence from other creatures in a futile attempt to repair themselves. The more essence they steal, the more powerful and dangerous they become. As they suck up essence, they pick up bits of corporeal matter, giving them a visible, if indistinct, form. Luckily, shadows can only draw a small bit of spiritual energy from souls still attached to a body or bound to an object. They mainly rely on creatures like the Pugra who I've talked about on other episodes, the primordial one, who can draw souls out of their physical form to help them obtain the essence they crave. Shadows have been known to draw spiritual energy from people while they sleep, when their souls are not bound as strongly to their bodies. This usually results in horrible nightmares that leave the person in an exhausted state the next day. If an entire town shares nightmares, it's highly probable that a strong shadow has taken up residence there. Since shadows absorb spiritual energy, they are difficult to detect for creatures who rely on spiritual sight. This had led to experiments in binding shadows to armor or other objects to act as a cloak to obscure those who do not wish to be seen by such creatures. So there's a lot of lore here to go over. Shadows are specifically creatures that have fractured souls. Fractured souls basically is kind of what it sounds like. It's a soul that's not entirely whole. And so here's kind of the idea, glossing over it quickly. Like I said, there's a cycle of reincarnation in this world, but it's not just like a smooth process, right? Like as these souls undergo reincarnation, they get fractured, they get damaged. There's a kind of entropy that goes on, a wearing out of the soul. It gets a little bit more wear and tear on it as it goes through the cycle, if you will. And certain souls, after enough wear and tear, if you will, they become fractured. And that's the word they use here. And if a soul is fractured enough, then it can't re-enter into the cycle of rebirth, and so it's trapped in the physical world. Whereas a phantom is specifically about the soul not detaching from the body properly, a shadow is the result of fractured souls not re-entering into the cycle of rebirth. Now, just like any sentient creature, you want to stay alive, you want to eat, you want to do all these things, right? And so what does the shadow do, this fractured soul that's wandering around? It goes around trying to eat as much essence as it can. Remember, essence being the stuff souls are made of. The idea that the shadow probably has, or at least the inclination that it has, is that it will make itself whole again. And so that's the whole point of what they're trying to do. The only reason you can see a shadow is because as it's wandering the world eating up essence, it happens to pick up corporeal matter along with that essence, and it kind of just holds it in itself, I suppose. And so that's why you can actually see shadows within the game. But they're not really able to take up a lot of essence at a time, so usually you'll find them in conjunction with other creatures that are much better at doing this, such as the Pugra, which takes your soul right out of your body if they can. And there's an interesting little bit of lore here about how, people, when they sleep, they have a less attachment to their soul, which is interesting, and I wonder what the implications of that would be. And that's why shadows tend to work at night, and where nightmares can happen, and if there's like massive amounts of nightmares, it probably means there's a shadow there, which is a cool hook, by the way, for tabletop role players. If you're thinking about anything like this, go ahead and take that for free. And so those are shadows. There's also that last little bit about being difficult to see if you have spiritual sight, and so animancers are trying to use shadows that are infused onto objects to make those objects less visible to people who have that kind of sight. There's all sorts of different shadows that you can see in the Pillars of Eternity games. For variants, you have the Ancient Wraith, the Shade, the Spectre, normal Wraiths, and I guess Phantoms to some degree as well. So all of these creatures are related in some way, shape, or another. Like, as we said, it's all about incorporeal soul, like a soul on its own without a body, wandering around, and the different circumstances in which they're made, the different circumstances in which they are being, and I know all those kind of things. And the last one that we want to discuss is called the Will-o-Wisp. City folk who never see will-o-wisps often think of them as the lost souls of children meandering into their next lives. Rural types who regularly encounter them find this hilarious. Wisps inhabit abandoned ruins and other forgotten places, and they're known to be curious, sometimes following adventurers and other visitors. While they may peacefully patrol their chosen haunts, they become extremely aggressive and territorial if provoked, or if they perceive a threat to their habitat. They are known as the weeds of the spirit world, small, quick to regenerate, and bothersome in large numbers. Like Delumgon, they have a friendly disposition towards rangers and druids. So the thing of note here with Will-o-Wisps, Will-o-Wisps, man, I don't know why I'm having a hard time saying this. Does anyone else ever do that? The thing about these creatures is that there's not really an origin story to them, right? So we have these other creatures that we've talked about. We've got blights, and that's just a bunch of like chaotically, violently fused souls put together. We have phantoms, which are souls that are not detaching from the body properly. We have shadows, which are souls that are heavily fractured and can't go back into the cycle of reincarnation. And then we have will-o-wisps, which are just kind of defined as where they can be found and how they typically behave. And I think that's because will-o-wisps are kind of like the catch-all for the rest of them. Maybe not a catch-all, but with all of these other kinds of creatures, we have this, I guess you could say, violent or incomplete nature about them. Shadows are fractured from wear and tear. The phantoms suffered a violent death, same with cRPGs, and blights are made out of a violent maelstrom of souls being ripped from people's bodies. Right? But what about the souls that are just wandering around the world that haven't moved on yet for whatever reason, right? Maybe their soul isn't fractured, their soul is whole, but for whatever reason they haven't or can't move on to the cycle of rebirth. What happens with those souls? I suspect that those are the souls that either become Will-o-Wisps on their own, or they collect together and then become Will-o-Wisps, and perhaps it's their amassing together that create them. But we don't actually have a creation or an origin for them written down here in the official lore. So if anyone has any more information from a source that perhaps I'm missing, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. But yeah, clearly Will-o-Wisps are a little more peaceful in nature because, people who live in urban environments think of them as having as just lost souls of children meandering to their next lives. And it's like, no, not really. They live in abandoned ruins, other forgotten places. So perhaps it's souls that have been in a location that they don't have easy access to reach the afterlife, and that's why they're in abandoned ruins or forgotten places. And they're basically just curious. Sometimes they follow people around. They can be aggressive and territorial at times, I guess. Like anything can be. That's not exclusive to just Will-o-Wisps, of course. So that's my personal interpretation of what a Will-o-Wisp is. It's kind of like the other spirits, the other soul essence creatures that don't have a fractured soul, that weren't violently killed, but they haven't been able to move on to the cycle of rebirth. That's how I'm kind of getting this. And those are the 4 main subcategories of spiritual creatures. Now, again, there are variants, which I've talked about here on this episode, and so that we kind of have those like different flavors of those particular kinds of creatures. And I'm interested to think about what other kinds of spirit creatures could we run into within the world of Eora. And I'm going to ask that question in conjunction with, will we see spirit-based creatures in Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
So my opinion on this is that we almost certainly will see them in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if they will be as commonplace as we see in Pillars of Eternity, just because I don't know what the focus of Avowed is, right? If there's a heavy narrative on going to ancient ruins where perhaps the undead are, then maybe we'll be seeing more undead and vessel kind of creatures than spirits. But I feel like it's almost a certainty that we will run into spirits in some way, whether or not they play a large role in the story, or if there are any side quests with major phantom bosses, who knows? Like that's the part where we're not sure about. But I would be surprised if we didn't run into even one, because it's quite an interesting creature to include in the game, right? To have some sort of ghosty that you have to fight or that you run into quite often that you see in certain places. I don't know. To me, it's just a very good creature to include. It adds a lot of quest hooks and stories that you can have there. There's probably going to be instances where you can interact with ghosts in some way, shape, or form. And I'm using the word ghosts loosely, of course, that give you information on quests or something that happened in someone's past life, or so you can learn information about what really went down in this situation. I don't see them not being included, considering how common they are in Pillars of Eternity and how easy it would be to include them in the narrative and how interesting they actually can be. So we almost certainly will. Now, to what extent will we see them? Again, I don't know. I think since we're probably going into ancient ruins and forgotten places, it makes sense that we would see Will-o-Wisps for sure. I don't know if there's a lot of Beowicks in the Living Land, so maybe not as many Blights, but there is animancy going on, and where there's animancy, you have rogue scientists that could be creating it. So I do suspect we will see them. I don't think they will play a main thing in the story, but they will definitely be part of it. But the question I'm really wondering is, are we going to see anything new, right? So for example, we were talking about the cRPG, which is the phantom of a spirit of a woman, basically, who was killed violently or died while giving birth to a hollowborn child. And those are a unique variant, I would say, of a phantom. And we don't really see a masculine counterpart to that. Obsidian did a pretty good job of, I think, covering all their bases. They have, souls that don't leave the body properly. They have souls that do leave the body but are fractured so they can't reincarnate. And they have a category for souls that do leave the body and aren't fractured in Will-o-Wisps. So I wonder what kind of other things people can come up with. Perhaps a soul that is tied to an object, like Animancers do with shades. Like if there was a way for a soul to be stuck to an object, like it couldn't go further away from a certain item, would it be something that kind of flits in and out of existence and you can only hit it when you can see it? And what would its behavior be like? That might be an example of a spirit. Obviously, I already mentioned the masculine version of the Keongula. What about you? I don't want to take up all the ideas. What kind of ideas for spirit-based creatures can you think of that we could see in Avowed, whether or not they do? Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. That's everything I actually wanted to talk about today. It was a little shorter of an episode, but hey, at least I'm actually going to get to put my son to bed on time today. So thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I don't really have anything to go over for news for the show. I'm just kind of getting back into the swing of things. Again, thank you for your patience and support as I've been healing lately. It's been very good. I haven't been playing anything particular, actually, in the last couple weeks. I got really nothing to talk about in that regards. I loaded up Tyranny. I played around with it. I checked out a couple of the new games on Game Pass. I checked out Like a Dragon. Was it Yakuza Like a Dragon? That one. I'm actually kind of interested in that, so I might start like playing that long form, but I heard that's a pretty long game, so we'll see. I did play one game recently that I didn't expect to enjoy. I was just going through my backlog, and it was 911 Operator. I did not think I would enjoy that, but I loved it. I went through 2 cities playing that game. I don't know. My brain needed it, I guess, at that moment, because it's just, you're just managing the emergency services in a city, answering 911 calls, and then, asking questions and trying to decide what to do. It's just a lot of management, and I don't know why, but that was my jam. I just needed that for a couple days. So, I bounce in and out of it every now and then, but that's what I've been playing lately. What have you been playing? Or what questions might you have? Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, or follow me on Twitter @worldofeora. And that's all we have to talk about today. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode as we dove into the lore regarding spirits and ghosty ghosts for creatures. I probably should have saved this as an episode for a Halloween special, but I have a feeling Avowed might be out before then or around then. Who knows? The statistics aren't in my favor. But anyways, that's the episode for today. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.